For the past few years, the story of the US-China tech war seemed pretty straightforward, right? America cut off the supply of advanced chips, and China was on the ropes. But what if that story wasn't just a little bit wrong? What if it was catastrophically wrong? Let's dive into this investigation of what is, frankly, one of the most audacious technological projects in modern history, one that's been hiding in plain sight. And that, right there, is the central, shocking claim of the source material we're looking at today. The whole narrative that sanctions were crippling Beijing's tech future, well, according to this investigation, that idea has been completely turned on its head. The evidence suggests that while the world was focused on the sanctions, China was busy building something else entirely, something extraordinary.
Okay, so to really get what China did, you first have to understand what they were up against. Back in October 2022, Washington dropped the hammer with these massive export controls. And the logic, you have to admit, it seemed flawless. If you can starve China of the specific tools they need to build advanced chips, you can essentially starve their entire high-tech future. The strategy was to build a perfect cage.
Now, what's so fascinating here is just how surgical this strategy was. It wasn't a blanket ban. It targeted 3 very specific and supposedly irreplaceable choke points. First, you've got the brain. That's the American EDA software you absolutely need to design any modern chip. Second, the factory. These are ASML's insane EUV machines, the only things on the planet that can actually print the most advanced chips. And third, the fuel, Nvidia's top-of-the-line AI chips. The raw horsepower, the compute that powers the entire AI revolution. The thinking was, if you control these 3, you control the future. Or so it seemed. Except China didn't give up. They didn't come to the negotiating table. They started to adapt. And their escape from this so-called perfect cage, well, it wasn't about trying to pick the locks. It was about re-engineering their entire system in a way that made the locks almost irrelevant.
So this is absolutely crucial. When you can't get your hands on the most powerful hardware, you have to change what your software demands from it. For years, Western AI has been this brute force arms race. Just throw more power, more data, more compute at the problem. But China, because they were forced to, developed a totally different philosophy with models like DeepSeek. It's all about extreme efficiency, surgical precision, and intelligence through elegance. It was a fundamental shift in thinking.
And this is a brilliant example of how they did it. This mixture of experts' architecture is key. Think of it like this. A typical Western AI model is like a city where if you ask for directions, every single light in the entire city has to turn on. A mixture of experts model is like a city where only the street lights on the specific path you need to take light up. The savings in energy and computation, they're not just a little better, they're revolutionary. But look, this wasn't just a clever software trick. They attacked the hardware problem from 2 directions at once. First, compression. If you can't build a bigger water pipe, what do? Well, you invent a way to turn the water into a superfine, concentrated mist, so you can get way more through the same pipe. Second was distribution. The idea here is, if you can't get 10 of the world's best super genius chips, you build a system that can perfectly coordinate 10,000 pretty good chips. It's a different way to solve the same problem. But even with all these clever tricks, you still need a colossal amount of energy to run everything. And this is where the story takes a truly surprising turn. While the whole world was obsessed with the chips themselves, China was quietly building something much, much bigger. A new foundation, a new civilization, really, of energy and infrastructure that would make everything else possible. And the program has a name, East Data West Computing. It is a massive national strategy, and it's based on a very simple geographic reality. All of China's data and digital economy is in the crowded, energy-hungry East, but all of its cheap, abundant, renewable energy is out in the vast, empty West. So the plan was simple. Build the computing where the energy is, and then connect it to where the data is. And the stuff they've built, it is just staggering. We're not talking about data centers near mountains. We're talking about data centers carved into mountains, using the planet's own rock for free passive cooling. That alone cuts energy costs by 1/3. They are building solar farms in the Gobi Desert on a scale that is hard to even imagine, creating energy from what they call sanction-proof photons. They're even putting servers underwater, using the ocean as a giant free heat sink. Now, it is so important to understand that none of this happened because of some free market miracle. Not at all. This was a top-down, sovereign decision carried out with the full power of the Chinese state and on a timeline that no normal company worried about quarterly earnings could ever dream of. You see, when the sanctions hit, the normal market signal was to run for the hills. The Chinese government looked at that signal and just said, nope, we're overriding it. And this slide shows you exactly how. They subsidized electricity for companies using Chinese chips. They handed out direct government grants for R&D. State-owned banks just opened up the credit lines. And government contracts created guaranteed demand. The state basically corrected the market to achieve its strategic goal. And the scale of this intervention is it's almost hard to wrap your head around. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. I mean, look at Huawei. They received huge sums in direct government grants. This wasn't a loan you have to pay back. This was essentially free cash with a simple instruction. Achieve semiconductor independence, whatever it takes. That's how a company's chip division can come back from the dead in a time frame that the market would have said was absolutely impossible. Okay, so let's zoom out. What does this all add up to? What does it mean for the global balance of power? Because the chip story and the energy story, they're really just pieces of a much bigger story about what happens when a country of 1.4 billion people decides that its technological sovereignty is a matter of national survival. And this strategy goes way beyond AI. Just look at electric vehicles. China now makes more EVs than the rest of the world combined. It's the same exact playbook we're seeing in batteries, in solar panels, in wind turbines. They picked these industries as strategic goals more than a decade ago and just systematically built total dominance. So the result is that this idea of decoupling, which started as a policy debate, is now becoming a hard structural reality. What we are literally watching is the birth of two parallel and increasingly incompatible tech stacks, an American cloud and a Chinese cloud, American chips and Chinese chips, an American internet and a Chinese internet. And that really brings us to the core lesson of this entire investigation. History is pretty clear on this. When you try to sanction a massive, determined, resource-rich nation, you don't destroy it. You forge it. The pressure turns a strategic goal into an existential mission, and you end up creating the very independence that you were trying to prevent. So the final question we're left with isn't whether the sanctions failed to stop China. The evidence seems pretty clear that they did. The real question is this. In the face of this new technological reality, built quietly, systematically, and with absolute state-driven intention, has the rest of the world even begun to understand what it's truly competing against?